Thank you very much, Mitchell. Next speaker, Professor Margaret is going to be attacking the topic of 3D printing and designs very much from a design perspective, thinking about sort of the history of the evolution and progression of designs. We're very grateful to have a designs leader from QT here to give us some perspectives on the way in which designs have evolved, particularly with some of the new 3D technologies. Professor.
Thank you, Matthew. And great to follow you, but slightly intimidating, Mitchell. I'm better at big picture than detail, let's say. But I can also promise, I don't think I have, maybe I have one Apple product, so we'll take a little break, although I do love the Macs as well. So when Professor Rimmer was so kind to invite me to speak, I just thought, oh, wow, what do I do with this? I'm a historian. That's my background. I'm a design historian, which is a bit of a rare breed as well. And I really wanted to think about what 3D printing and 3D scanning and 3D technologies mean for design as a profession, and the questions it's asking us, which are involved in all the kind of questions that many of you are looking at, but from a kind of design-centric point of view. And to do that, and also play to my own strengths, it's helpful to go back and look at really the origins of contemporary design. And I would say the great thing about being a historian, it's like being a train conductor. Angela, I already heard this today. You get to decide where you start and where you stop. So I'm deciding to start here, and I'll explain why a little bit. So this is Raymond Loewy. He was a French-American industrial designer, and according to who you ask, probably invented in many ways modern consumer culture and industrial design in the United States, and branded it. So he, over the course of his career, consulted for over 200 different companies, designing things like your classic Coca-Cola bottle and Lucky Strikes packages, and all of the logo designs that you see behind him and more, and cars and trains and spacecraft. I mean, he wasn't afraid of any design challenge. And oops, that's the wrong machine. There we go. And he's quite famous for his commercial orientation, let's say. And this is one of his classic quotes: "Is the most beautiful curve is a rising sales graph." So that a good design is going to sell like hotcakes, and that's what you really want to design. You want to design that thing that the market can't get enough of. And he certainly achieved that with his products. This is one, and if you take a design history class, you're always going to hear about the cold spot story. So he was brought in by Sears to rethink their cold spot refrigerator, take it from a 4-foot American, imperial, square cubic thing to a refrigerator to a 6-foot. But other than that, kind of saying the same. And he rethought it aesthetically more than technologically. And in so doing, within 1 year's time, increased sales of the cold spot by 300%. And this was in 1935. So this is really on the tail of the Depression. So it's not when people had a lot of disposable income. But the notion in the United States really was around, you're buying your way of life. And I think it's quite telling, even looking at these two images, just how the interior of the fridge is represented. In the first image, which is 1931, you have like one piece of ham on one shelf. And then in the I think this is 40, and as a later version of the cold spot, everything's packed in there. Like you'd have to take stuff out to find the thing you want. So it's that like more is better. So this kind of consumer engine is really coming to life in the United States in the 40, and the idea that kind of too much isn't enough, and it is driven. Till spilling out, right? Like we got so much stuff. We've got it's just overflowing, and you'll see in these images, which we all love, it's such a classic period of consumer culture. Everything's got a label on it. It's got a brand. So design is very complicit and facilitating of these relationships between what people buy and why, and industrial design in particular very much around making products as enjoyable and as desirable, importantly, for consumers as possible. So if we think about that, the refrigerator that's spilling out, I love this because it's probably, you can't read it, I don't know here, but it says now this is the cold spot freezer, which probably goes in the garage or what have you, and you have the store that never closes, right? So also in this, there's this kind of supply chain thing where instead of the milkman coming and bringing you a bottle of milk that sits on your door, then suddenly you get a larger bottle of milk and it lasts you a little longer. And then you get this freezer so you can have like, sort of 3 weeks of food, and the kind of warehousing moves to the consumer. And so in the 50s, you start to see more and more the pantries getting bigger and more space for things. So it's this kind of, I took it out, but the kind of Costco mentality where I'm going to go and get as much as I can to stock up for as long as I can. And I think that's something we'll definitely be seeing change as new supply chains come forward. So what we're really talking about is this consumer-ism, that comes to life in the 40s and the 50s, not only in the United States, but, I think that they were pretty good at getting it right in the first instance. And along with that, and this is all going to come together, I promise, hopefully, and make sense in the end. The idea that you're not just buying things, but they are nice to have, but that it's also an expression of lifestyle, a good life, the American life in this instance, and of personality. So in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, what you bought said something about who you were and what color you would buy, what kinds of finishes. So there's this kind of personalization that's available through choice. So if you see here, the art of better living, and you have all these things that are like arranged like paintings on the far right there. And it is, which ones are you going to pick? Because this is the artistry of your life. So design is really focused on giving people those options, allowing them to express themselves, and having that embody a lifestyle and a kind of understanding of, what you're working for. The labor is it being spent in something that's coming back to you as something enjoyable. And again, if you look at these images, it's brand. So it's also very much about brand development in this period and getting brand loyalty, which is tied in to the design as well. And everything, everything. This one I kept thinking, you can see the garage sale in like 5 years, can't you? Anyway, so also with this is, and particularly in a design sensibility, the importance of universality. So if I'm trying to sell lots of things, or one thing lots of times to consumers, I need it to be as useful and appropriate to as many people as possible because I want to make one thing and sell it a lot. So in the 50s in particular, we start to see this move towards a kind of universal solution, right? And Henry Dreyfuss famously created Joe and Josephine. So these were figures that were meant to be the average American. So they were designed at the 50 percentile. Joe was, 5'11", 162 pounds. Josephine, 5 foot, 5 inches, 135 pounds. As I said, standing in the 50th percentile. And these were taken from various places, or it's not like today, but data that had been collected by the Army and by doctors and others. But what it was used for was to, okay, if we want to design, let's say, a tractor, what's the ideal length from the knee to the pedal, and where should the gear shift be, and where should the wheel be? And Dreyfuss, the intention was good. It was that the machine should fit the person shouldn't have to fit the machine. So the closer we can design the thing to fit the person, rather than asking the individual user to just work it out on their own, the more successful that product will be, and of course, the better the sales curve will be. So this is, the tractor that he designed based on that average American. So So then, you kind of get into these are very specific designed products to fit a generic person. And also at the same time, along with this standardization, which is theoretically based on universal conditions, averages of humans, a more philosophical approach, and figures like Charles and Ray Eames. So this is Charles Eames working on an airplane wing with the military in the United States during the war, and they're bending plywood to understand how that material would work. So, and they were also looking at splints. It's the famous Eames story. And eventually, in the post-war period, this comes up as the dining chair wood and some other products, which, if you're a design fan, are very well known. So the idea with this one was that it was fit to the human body. Maybe not a standard human body, but it was soft and it had curves and you could sink into it and it was organic. So this was, in a way, a kind of universal, but universally aesthetically pleasing product. And kind of sitting on that edge of art, right? Like it's not just something that's defined by the measurements of a human. There's something a little secret sauce in there, right? So this feeds into, I think is this kind of obsession, a modernist obsession with, perfection of form. And that's part the kind of getting it right for, general human use, but also the beauty of it, the design of it, and that being something that's very unique and special, and it kind of comes from the mind of the creator and goes through this process. And you can see the sort of fetishization of particular aspects of the design, and that's also wrapped up again, particularly and. Apologies, but my research is all in the United States, so these are my references. But in the mid-century, with the notion of good design, so something like the Eames, they participated. This was a collaboration between the Merchandise Mart, which was the largest wholesaler in the United States, practically, of home furnishings and things in Chicago, and the Museum of Modern Art. So they said, let's get together and let's decide what's good design, and then we'll tell people about it. And in fact, we'll create this little tag that says good design, and then retailers can hang it on furniture and stuff when they sell it, and they'll know, this is like authorized by MoMA, so it must be good. And the idea was that American consumers didn't really know better, and that they would be happier if they understood what good design was and what wasn't good design, and knew where to buy it and who was selling it. So this went from 1946 to 1955, and it was an annual exhibition that would start either in New York at the Museum of Modern Art or at the Chicago at the Merchandise Mart, and then travel around. And it was a really big deal, and so it kind of, I think, embedded this idea of good design and its value and its particularness and its specialness, and something that wasn't just the average product. And of course, its most exalted form, you would see in something like the Barcelona chair, which Florence Knoll was very clever and managed to negotiate the copyright from Mies van der Rohe when there were a number of furniture manufacturers who wanted to get their hands on it, but she had a good relationship with him. So Knoll started actually producing this commercially in 1950, and I would beg any of you to walk into any corporate lobby and not see this exact setup. Now, may or may not actually be Knoll chairs, because there's lots and lots and lots of replicas, but I think the power of that iconicness, it carries. It has an incredible longevity, or it has. So this was one of the showrooms in 1951. And you'll see it again and again and again, and it's the same setup every time. It's like people are mortified to put a different, stool there. Like it would ruin the whole thing. And at the time, these chairs, the Barcelona chairs, sold for over $1,000. It was 1950, so it was not cheap. It wasn't good design for everybody, which is what the kind of philosophy was. And then I think this is all a part of the cult of the designer, and each designer, this is from 1960, I believe, Playboy magazine, so it's where they all wanted to get to, I guess, sitting on their famous chairs. So there's the famous designers sitting in their famous chairs, looking clever. So there's this identification, I think, with the designer, with the unique work, and the specialness of the design that they've created. which I describe now as like heroic design. And I would say, again, it's alive and well with us still today. These are some of our famous favorite people of design. Of course, we've got Mark Newsom and Johnny Ives. Sorry, I'm having a moment here. Marcel Wanders, Karen Rashid, Philippe Starck. Nobody can have a talk on design without him. And they're still playing out this idea of, the idea comes from the creator, and you have this beautiful, perfect design that comes from it. And it's a very proprietary thing. These are some examples of the types of products that these designers have made. Like a camera, this is a really interesting story, sold at auction for $1.8 million. And it famously went through 561 prototypes before it was finished. This was for Red, it was charity. The Mark Newsom jet was commissioned by the Cartier Foundation for Contemporary Art. I don't think it can actually fly, but it looks very nice. And probably the world's worst lemon squeezer juicer, Philippe Starck's famous Juicy Salif, which I've heard makes a wonderful wedding gift. All very unique. Oh, and this is really great. Marcel Wander's egg vase that was made by taking a condom and filling it with eggs and then getting the form. And so it's very playful. It's very, very funny. It's very, very clever. This kind of iconic design and design as hero, I think, has some real challenges when we're looking at an age of distributed design. So I chose Pinocchio because they started in New Zealand, and I used to be there, and I love the guys that started it. But the idea that, Mitchell just told us so much about, that, I can buy a thing, I can make a thing, I can sell a thing, all of that with the technologies we're talking about today. I don't have to wait for Philippe Starck to be sitting on the Amalfi Coast and realize he didn't get lemon with his calamari to come up with the Juicy Salif, right? I can just order a copy of it and print it up, or I might design something myself. But it inverts the kind of power structure of what design has been. This is another one that came out of New Zealand, sketch chair that was sold through Pinocchio. And the idea was you could go on, pick a kind of chair form, you could move it around, you could make it the way you want, and then you could actually test it online, see if you'd be able to sit or fall over or what would happen. Then they could fabricate it and send it to you flat pack, and you make it yourself. Now we've got a whole array. Like if you, like I did, Google 3D printers, all kinds of stuff comes up. This image I love because they put the Eames chair in the background. Yeah. And then they printed this monstrosity of Baroque whateverness. Like every modernist would be like, no, don't do that. But you could print that table. I mean, I don't know why you'd want to, but you could, now the robotic arms that can mimic human, fabrication and, changing the way that things can be put together. Anyone can have a 3D printer at home if you've got $1,200 or less. So the idea that design is held by a sacred few is not true. And then I would say added to that the idea of personal design or personalized design. So if I want a pair of shoes, I can go online and I can pick the heel and I can pick the toe and I can pick the color and essentially design it through options and then have it made and sent to me in less than 2 weeks. So I don't, need to wait for Jimmy Choo to come up with next year's season. I can, be my own Choo, Miss Choo. Or Fame and Partners. There's so many of these. I went to a recent, showcase for startup, and 3 of the 5 companies were variations on, design your own thing and get it at home in a very short period of time. So this is again, it's a bit of an older project, but I think it's kind of telling, from 2014. This was a student that was a master's in Victoria University when I was working there. And he was working with 3D scanners, scanning the foot, looking at how you could 3D print custom footwear, something, lots of companies, Nike and all the rest are getting into. Now, the technology and the desire for where those companies want to be isn't there yet, but, if you can use computational design to understand, for a high performance athlete like the sprinter, does anyone know her name? I'm not gonna be able to find it. Anyway, world famous sprinter, the Nike was working with her to scan her foot and to understand what she needed to get just a little bit faster. So when design becomes about engineering performance and making something that's very much about the specificity of each individual's body, it's not so much about the vision of the designer. It's really about understanding the customer and the uniqueness of what they want. I got a little carried away. Amazoning, and then putting into that also changes in the way we get things and the way we buy things. So, when my refrigerator can order things for me without even asking me based on it knowing what I like, that refrigerator of the 1950s that was all about making me desire the food in it is kind of obsolete because, Amazon needs to make my refrigerator want to buy stuff. And again, I think they're very different questions, and I think designers are kind of hiding their heads in the sand and not figuring out where they sit in this ecosystem now. So if we think about, go back again, Charles Eames, he described design as a plan for arranging elements to accomplish a particular purpose. And I think that holds true. That is in many ways the essence of design. It's like, what do you want to achieve, and what is it going to take to do that? But I think in this evolution that we've been looking at, too much emphasis has been put on the design as a design rather than as an arrangement of elements to accomplish a purpose. So we're in the home stretch now. We have thousands of chairs. We have thousands of lamps. We have books that will tell us about them. I would say we don't really need more chair designs, and we probably don't need more lamp designs, especially if I could download them. So this was something I was sort of thinking about. So there's a mantra in design and architecture, like God is in the details. If you get it perfect down to that, like millisecond, it will last forever. But if design is not about that kind of perfection anymore, and it's more about what we can get from the user, the 3D body scans and that data, and designing the algorithms that are going to determine the outcome, where does design sit? Does it sit in figuring out how we're going to process the data, how we're going to output it? But it's not about this heroic godlike figure anymore. And I think for design as a profession and as a discipline, that there needs to be some thinking about where do we sit, and where do we want to impact those final outcomes, as we have some very complicated questions to ask ourselves. Here we go. Thank you.